All right, so with T helper cells, these are going to be cells that they're not going to be destroying the pathogen. Instead, what they're going to do is these, I kind of think of these are like the kind of like the tattletales of the immune cells. They go and they see that there's a pathogen present somewhere, and so what they're going to do is they're going to be the ones yelling for help. They're like, oh my goodness, guess what's over here? Come get it, type thing. So let's go ahead and just kind of do an overview of what these T helper cells do. So T helper cells, they're going to interact with what's called an antigen presenting cell. So these antigen presenting cells, these things are kind of like, they're like, I'll just draw something like a macrophage. So these things are kind of like little cookie monsters. They'll gobble up things from the environment. And what's going to happen, these antigen presenting cells. So there's 3 antigen presenting cells that we'll talk about in this class. So one is a B cell, can be an antigen presenting cell. Another can be dendritic cells. Remember, we've talked about dendritic cells before. We talked about phagocytosis. And also another type of antigen presenting cell in this class is the macrophage. So these antigen presenting cells are what we also call APCs for short. These are going to be gobbling up things from the outside. So here's, maybe this is a bacterium, here's other things, but they're going to go ahead and engulf it. And when this bacteria gets, gobbled up inside the cell, what can happen is this cell, the antigen presenting cell, is going to take the fragments of it, and it's going to present it. So that's where it gets its name. It's presenting some type of an antigen. So I'm just going to put here, this was, the pathogen. It got digested here. And now, part of that pathogen, its antigen is being showed. So, so an antigen of the digested pathogen. Okay. So now that we have this antigen presenting cell holding up a piece of this bacterium or virus or whatever, what's going to happen is we're going to go ahead and get this T helper cell that comes along. So here's my T helper cell. T helper cells are going to specifically interact with these antigen presenting cells. So these T helper cells, put TH, they're going to come up to the antigen presenting cell, and it's going to go and look for this little arm type extension that's presenting that cell. So this is called MHC2. Okay, so T helper cell is going to have a T cell receptor that interacts with MHC2. Remember, MHC stands for Major Histocompatibility Complex. But these are going to interact with each other. And when they do that, the T helper cell can say, oh my goodness, you have this MHC2 that has this antigen on it. That means there's a pathogen around here. We better yell for help, call for backup. So T helper cell then, when it interacts with this, the antigen presenting cell, it's going to go ahead and it's going to, call for help. It needs backup because they know there's a pathogen somewhere around here. So what happens then is after this T helper cell becomes activated through this, it's going to have a few different responses. So we'll just put them over here. So one thing after, I'll just put that up here. So after the T cell binds to the antigen, remember that antigen is being presented by the antigen presenting cell through its MHC2. What's going to happen is you're going to get macrophages that become activated. So the T helper cell, it's going to release these different chemical signals to activate those macrophages. So by doing that, that's going to increase phagocytosis, right? Macrophages can phagocytose things. So any other bacteria or virus floating around will hopefully get phagocytosed. Also, when the T helper cell releases those different signals, we're going to get B cells that become activated. And then when these B cells become activated, we're going to see this later in the chapter, that we're going to get B memory cells that are made. And antibodies to this particular pathogen will be made as well. Oops, I should have put antibodies made, sorry. All right. Another thing that happens after the T cell, is calling for help, is that neutrophils are going to come to that site. So let's put neutrophils are recruited. So neutrophils are going to help, these are going to destroy bacteria, fungus, things like that, that are outside the cell. Oops, the cell. And then lastly, the last result of a T helper cell becoming activated is that you're going to get the production, or you're going to produce T memory cells. So when having these T memory cells, they'll be able to recognize that antigen that's already, it's been seen before, and then this is going to allow for more rapid immune response the second time. We'll just say a rapid immune response, we'll say for the next exposure. And that's going to be, to that pathogen. Okay. So by having those T memory cells, just like even having the flu virus, if you had the flu once, even if you got exposed to it a second time, these T memory cells can, see that right away, and they'll be, quick to help fight off that infection. So that's T helper cells. T helper cells, they have a T cell receptor that goes and looks for the MHC2 that presents some antigen. So that antigen is going to be a chopped up piece of pathogen that's being presented by antigen presenting cells. So hopefully not too bad. So let's go ahead and talk about next the T cytotoxic cells.